this is the panel on Star Trek writing. And by amazing coincidence, I think we have to start this out. Today is William Shatner's 94th birthday.
Oh.
So, happy birthday, William Shatner. William Shatner is 94 years old today. He has more energy than I do. There's people in this room. I would not probably still be, in this business if not for William Shatner. Okay. Star Trek novels are only 57 years old today. The very first one, Mission to Horatius by Mac Reynolds, came out in 1968. Some people think that Spock Must Die by James Blish is the first Star Trek novel. But that was the first adult Star Trek novel. There was a YA novel, Mission to Horatius, published a few months earlier. But yeah, I'd say just for his introduction, my name is Greg Cox, and among other things, I'm a professional Trekkie. I have been writing Star Trek novels for Simon & Schuster and its various imprints now for 30 plus years. This is the most recent one, Short Tale, just came out in July. This is a collection of Star Trek short stories that came out in December. I contributed to that one. And by coincidence, I told some of you, these people, today, I actually just delivered a new Star Trek novel to the publisher on Monday, like 4 days ago. I was actually making a real effort to deliver that book on time on March 17th so I could come to Zenkaikon with a clean conscience and not, be worried about my deadlines. That book is called Identity Theft. We'll begin with the commercial announcement. That book is called Identity Theft. It comes out in November. It is up on Amazon already. It's always terrifying when the Amazon listing shows up before you finish writing the book. Now you are committed. Oh, Jesus. It says right there on Amazon, I guess I have to write this darn book. And that is actually a Chekhov book. And I'll talk more. I realized, despite having written 20 plus Star Trek books and been writing, that I had neglected Chekhov. He's been in my books. He's usually in the background. Thank you, Captain. Shield stand to 5. So I decided I was going to write a Chekhov-centric novel. Give Chekhov his moment in the spotlight. Chekhov saves the universe. Chekhov gets the girl. Chekhov is the main character. Spock, McCoy, Captain Kirk are basically supporting characters in this book. I'll be curious to see what the fans think of that. And that is the book I delivered on Monday. So hey, it's still fresh in my brain. But anyway, so I see that this event is scheduled as a reading and Q&A. I actually did bring a short story to read. I'm also willing here to answer questions. Do we have a preference? Do you guys want the reading? Do you want to talk about how Star Trek novels are written? Start off with a question and answer? Shall I go reading first and then we can seg into the Q&A? I'm not sure what you want to hear me talk about Star Trek writing or if you want to hear me read the story here first. General consensus from the audience?
Reading.
I say reading.
Okay, you want the reading. Very good.
Read to us.
And that is just like Captain Kirk. I need my reading glasses because I am allergic to retinox. Okay, so how many people here have seen The Trouble with Tribbles? I thought that was a safe bet. This story, which originally appeared in Star Trek Explorer magazine, and was reprinted just recently here, is called The Trouble with Jones. I'll show you the lovely illustration here by Andy Walker.
Oh.
And the Jones in question is Cyrano Jones. For those of you who remember, he was the lovable entrepreneur who caused all that difficulty with Tribbles some time ago. So we have a big drink of water because nothing dries your mouth out faster than doing a public reading.
True.
Facts.
True.
Yes. Okay, here we go. Captain Kirk! Fred Kirk! Kirk groaned. He'd been enjoying shore leave at a tropical beach resort on Siduri, an independent world only loosely affiliated with the Federation, until he recognized an all too familiar voice. Cyrano Jones, interstellar trader and general nuisance, beamed at Kirk from a beachside shack roofed with crimson palm fronds. The portly merchant seemed genuinely pleased to see Kirk, which was rather puzzling considering their history. Jones. The captain approached the shack warily. Hand-lettered driftwood signs advertised fruity drinks, clams, trinkets, at suspiciously reasonable prices. Kirk was also pleasantly surprised to see no Tribbles in evidence. What are you doing here? Enjoying the good life, Captain. Jones stepped out from behind the counter in front of the shack. Given the balmy climate, he had swapped his usual olive coat for a gaudy floral patterned shirt, knee-length shorts, and sandals. He gestured grandly at sand, sea, sun, and sky. Who could ask for anything more? A pint-sized Andorian girl, no more than 7 years old, interrupted the reunion, tugging on Cyrano's arm. "Excuse me, Mr. Cyrano?" She held up a small wooden carving of an aqua princess, carved with polished seashell fragments. "How much is she?" "A mere 2 credits, little darling," Jones said, "and a bargain at that." Her antennae drooped. "Oh, I only have half a credit. I spent the rest of my allowance on kelp frosties." The girl's forlorn expression had Kirk reaching for his own local currency. But Jones spoke up first. "Hold on. Did I neglect to mention my shiny smile discount? Available only to the best little girls? A big grin knocks the price down to exactly 1/4 credit." Bemused, Kirk looked on as the delighted child wandered off, clutching her prize. "That was unexpectedly generous of you, Jones." The Cyrano Jones he knew was always out to make a fast credit, even if it meant playing fast and loose with the law and public safety. Granted, Jones had once provided Yura with a complimentary dribble, but only with an eye to drumming up sales. Kirk couldn't see any long-term advantage to essentially giving the carved mermaid away. Business doing that well? He found it hard to believe that the unprepossessing snack shack, I shouldn't have put that in there, could be all that lucrative. Jones wasn't going to get rich off it. Jones shrugged. "I make a modest living, clam digging, beach combing, and the like. But what more do I truly need? Credits aren't everything, after all." Kirk was still trying to process that when a middle-aged couple in beach attire strolled by. They waved cheerily at Jones. "Hey, Cyrano!" the man called out. "Thanks again for helping out at the reefs the other day. We really appreciate it." "Always a pleasure to assist my friends and neighbors." "You coming to the Glow Tide feast tomorrow night?" the woman asked. "Wouldn't miss it for a dozen worlds. Can't wait to partake of your famous anemone punch." Kirk felt as though he'd accidentally beamed into another mirror universe. Cyrano Jones, an asset to his community, getting by as a genial beach bum, not conniving to make a killing? He didn't buy it. "What are you up to, Jones?" "What can I say, Captain? I'm a changed man who regrets whatever difficulties I may have caused you in the past." As a rule, Jones's exaggerated bonhomie had always been transparently self-serving, but this time Kirk heard nothing but sincerity in his voice. "Are you feeling well, Jones?" "Never better, and healthy as a horta." Kirk debated how to proceed. As far as he knew, Jones still had outstanding warrants for his arrest, dating back to his unauthorized exit from Deep Space Station K7. But Siduri was not under the Federation's jurisdiction, and extraditing Jones might be more trouble than it was worth. Plus, Kirk was on vacation, he was out of uniform, and unarmed. He had his communicator in case the USS Enterprise needed to contact him in an emergency or vice versa. But was a reformed Cyrano Jones really an emergency? "Jones, you double-crossing slime devil! Did you really think you could get away from me?" A furious stranger stormed towards Jones, clearly with a score to settle. "Friend Hastings," Jones said, somewhat sheepishly, "what brings you to Siduri? Don't give me that friend hogwash. Friends don't ditch their business partners on a backwater planet in the middle of nowhere and make off with the product." Now that sounds like Jones, Kirk thought. Hastings was a nondescript fellow whose rumpled brown suit looked out of place on the beach. Kirk thought he looked vaguely familiar, but couldn't immediately place the name or face. He lingered to see how this awkward encounter played out. "Not my finest moment," Jones conceded, "but can't we let bygones be bygones? Allow me to offer you a cooling libation on the house. I don't want a drink. I want what you stole from me." Hastings drew a phaser from beneath his suit. Where is it? Hold on, Kirk intervened. Let's not lose our heads here. Put the phaser away before matters get out of hand. Mind your own business, mister. Hastings glared at Kirk after he ignored him before. His eyes widened in recognition. Hatred contorted his face. Kirk! You ruined my life, you arrogant bastard! A phaser beam knocked the captain out cold.
Oh.
Hang on, I'm not done yet. Scene break.
Suspense.
I'm telling you for the last time, Jones, give me back what's mine. Kirk awoke to find that both he and Jones taped to the surprisingly sturdy posts in the back of Jones's shack. His communicator rested atop a kitchen counter, out of reach. I would be delighted to oblige, but regretfully that is not so easily accomplished. No excuses, Jones. I want those spores. Spores? Kirk belatedly remembered where he knew Hastings from. The man was one of the colonists relocated from Omicron City-3 a few years ago, after being liberated from the tranquilizing influence of the mind-altering spores on that world. Could those same spores be responsible for Jones's easygoing new attitude? The Omicron City spores? Kirk interrupted. My understanding was those couldn't grow or thrive outside their native environment, which had been inundated by Berthold rays. I was working on that, Hastings insisted. Given sufficient time and resources, I can find a way to grow them elsewhere, beyond the meddling reach of the Federation. Or that was the plan, before Jones betrayed me. Jones offered a nervous smile. I wouldn't quite put it that way. How else would you describe it? Hastings appeared eager to vent. Do you know how hard it was to smuggle a pod plant off the planet during the evacuation, right under the nose of Kirk's Starfleet goons? Then I had the bad luck to run into you. You convinced me that the spores had commercial potential with their gift of tranquility and perfect health, right before absconding with the pod and leaving me in the lurch. He waved the phaser in Jones's face. So where are my spores? Well, if you must know, the spacecraft I borrowed to seek out new investors ran into a spot of interstellar turbulence, and the pod's containers spilled open during the flight. And you got exposed to your own product, Kirk deduced. And the pod, Hastings asked, what happened to it? The poor thing expired, I'm afraid. I did my best to nurture it, but as you recall, it was already ailing when I took it off your hands, as it were. So you see, there's nothing left to quarrel over. Easy come, easy go. Probably just as well, Kirk attempted to reason with Hastings. Omicron City-3 was evacuated with good reasons. Those spores had sapped you of all drive and ambition, the very traits that led you to seek a new life on a new world in the first place. Hastings wheeled about to confront Kirk. Who were you to judge, Kirk? I was happy there, happier than I'd ever been. You robbed me of paradise. Hastings turned the phaser on Kirk. He switched the setting from stun to kill. Funny thing, Kirk. I wouldn't want revenge if I was still on spores. Too bad for... There was a knock on the door. Hello, Cyrano. The voice belonged to one of those friendly neighbors who had strolled by earlier. Sorry to drop by unannounced, but we brought you a fresh pot of my anemone broth, since you were so looking forward to it. Hastings gave his captives a warning look, holding a finger to his lips. Cyrano, are you all right? Why aren't you coming to the door? Hastings swore under breath. Don't breathe a word, either of you, while I get rid of these pests, unless you want them to share your fate. He headed out front, leaving Kirk and Jones alone in the back. This is our chance, Kirk tested his bonds, which proved too secure. We need to think fast before he gets back. But what can we do? Jones threw up his hands, figuratively. It seems our time has come, Captain. Whatever will be, will be. Blasted, I don't need a kinder, gentler Cyrano Jones right now. I need the crafty survivor who always lands on his feet. And Kirk knew there was only one way to get that Cyrano back. I should have realized you'd be useless in a pinch, Jones. You're a disgrace, an oily, small-time grifter who's been nothing but trouble since the day we met. Friend Kirk! Jones's pained expression made Kirk feel like he was kicking a puppy. but he persisted for both their sakes. You call yourself a changed man? Don't make me laugh. You're still the same pathetic embarrassment you've always been, just weaker and more helpless. But really, Captain, there's no call for that kind of language. I'm just getting started. You have less spine than a tribble and fewer scruples than a Klingon. You're a worthless, no-account, double-dilled. Now see here, Kirk. Jones flushed with anger. I won't stand for. He paused and blinked in confusion as good old-fashioned fury burned away his bliss, just as it had with Spock years before. The color drained from Jones's face. What in perdition have I been doing? Welcome back, Jones, Kirk said. And none too soon, Kirk overheard snatches of conversation as Hastings sent Jones's unsuspecting visitors on their way. Cyrano's all tied up at present, but I'll make sure he gets that broth. Me? Oh, I'm an old friend of his. A few pleasantries later, he was back with his phaser. Now then, where were we? You were about to throw away the opportunity of a lifetime, my short-sighted friends, Jones said. Kirk is too valuable to be disintegrated out of mere spite. The Romulans, the Klingons, the Orions, there's no shortage of parties who will pay a fortune for the classified Starfleet secrets in Kirk's head. Assuming, that is, you have the connections and the expertise to properly auction them off to the highest bidder. He puffed out his chest, which, as it happens, I have in abundance. Seriously, you're asking me to trust you again? What's past is past. You need to think about the future, friend Hastings, and the positively galactic profits in the offing. Hastings appeared intrigued despite himself. Even if I was willing to consider this, who is going to finance this endeavor? I spent my last credit tracking you to Siduri. There's a strong box hidden at the back of the pantry, holding valuables in anticipation of a hasty departure. Spiking flame gems, Elasian aphrodisiacs and such. See for yourself if you don't believe me. You bet I will. Jones directed him to the strongbox. The passcode is Glommer, by the way. Greed got the better of Hastings. Placing the box on a table, he keyed in the combination, only to get a faceful of swirling orange vapor. Gasping, he staggered backwards. A booby trap, Kirk surmised. He held his breath as the gas swiftly dispersed. Hastings' eyes went slack, his eyes glassy. A mild hypnotic, Jones explained, rendering him briefly suggestible to him, to suggestion. Suggestion, Hastings echoed robotically. Jones demonstrated the gas's effect by having Hastings free him from the post, then hand over his phaser, which Jones promptly employed to study him. Pleasant dreams. Kirk remained bound, however, and at Jones's mercy. To his surprise, however, Jones loosened Kirk's bonds somewhat. There now, you should be able to extricate yourself, eventually. In the meantime, I'll help myself to your communicator to allow me a decent head start before you can contact the Enterprise. I don't understand, Kirk said. You don't want to get back at me for our past run-ins? Not to mention everything I just called you, and what happened to auctioning me off to the highest bidder? Moi? Jones clutched his heart as though shocked by the very notion. I owe you one, Kirk, for breaking those spores of Bonneville's spell over me. You saw what they turned me into. A guileless layabout, more interested in sunsets than credits. A shudder ran through him. It was ghastly. Yet. That was fun. The upper limit for the stories for Star Trek Magazine was 250 words. So I gotta say, that is nothing. Especially when you've been spoiled. This book was 130,000 words. So trying to tell a whole Star Trek story in 250 words was an interesting challenge. And, it was a cute little vignette there, as opposed, that was a good place for coming up with ideas that really I couldn't extend to an entire novel or like a nice little, and perfect for doing a reading at a convention since it was only 2,500 words. So good. That is a recent story I wrote by Cyrano Jones, and that is TOS, which is my first love. So does anyone want to know now about how Star Trek books are written?
Yes.
Very good. The process is pretty much identical for all media tie-ins across the board, regardless of whether you're talking the Librarians, the X-Files, Star Wars, whatever. It's a very collaborative process because, of course, Star Trek does not belong to me. You're shocked? No, I did not invent Star Trek. I do not own Star Trek. I'm not that old. But so typically I submit like a 12 to 15 page outline for a new book. I submit to my editor at Pocketbooks. They may have comments bounced back to me. We straighten it out, and once we're happy with it, this is then forwarded on to the powers that be at CBS, where they again weigh in. They make their comments, suggestion you can do this, don't do this, don't even think about Spock's spring break, you know. And we go back and forth, use either about until finally we have a plot we all agree on, at which point I get a contract and I set to work writing the book. Once I have written the book, I then deliver it to my editor. They edit it. There's back and forth comments. You know, the basic, main structure has been approved already, but it's a lot of, I had to spell out all details. And then when we're done with that, it's sent to CBS, and there's the other round of comments. And don't do this. Some of the comments I've gotten, I still remember getting a note back. Captain Janeway cannot drink coffee in the transporter room. And honestly, you choose your battles. We negotiate. That is a hill I was not prepared to die on. Okay, that should be all 5 minutes. Okay, delete copy. And, okay, and then of course, then it goes get copy and proofread it, and eventually it shows up at your bookstore. I'm actually in the middle of this process now. I mentioned to some of the people before how formally started. I actually delivered a new Star Trek novel to Simon & Schuster on Monday. And now I am waiting to hear back the comments from the editor, and then it will be sent on to CBS. And this all happened pretty promptly because the book is supposed to come out in November. So, and generally at this point, I would say Star Trek novels have been going on for 57 years. Simon & Schuster has had the license since the early 80s, I think since the novelization of Star Trek the Motion Picture. So at this point, it's a pretty well, we got a system going here. And there's not a lot of unpleasant surprises, and I like to think at this point I have a pretty good sense of how far I can push the envelope and how far I can't, and where the red flags are. And again, it's a very collaborative, it's not an adversary relationship. A word I always use is, it's a very, very, you're playing in somebody else's sandbox. There are lots of cooks involved. This is not necessarily a bad thing if you actually are all, at this point, a well-oiled machine is the term I was going for earlier, And again, and sometimes it comes to ideas. It goes both ways. Sometimes it's just a case of, hey, Greg, we need a TOS book for July. What have you got? And I'll come up with ideas, and I'll say, hey, how about a sequel to Spock's Brain? And it'll say, okay, come try again, Greg. This is a running gag here. Or sometimes they may have a specific, like saying, oh, we want a Borg book. Can you get us a Borg book for July? We want a book about Q. Oh, and it may be all the suggestion is we want a book about Q. Okay, then I go off and I Q idea. That's actually how the magazine worked too. The magazine sadly is now canceled, but a lot of times I would get a note saying, hi, we're doing a Borg themed issue. Give me a Borg story. We're doing a, we're doing a TNG themed issue. Give me a Picard story. And that was always kind of fun because I can go out and think of a Picard story. So it's a very interactive. And then, I'll come up with a great idea. They'll say, that's a very good idea, but how about you do this instead? And so it's that is the process. It's been going on for many years now. It's with several mini editors. And a lot of times it begins with. At this point, I'm in a position where, like I said, I've been part of the stable since the early days of Deep Space Nine. So I just kind of, I sent them out. And you wait for a slot to open because there's only so many slots. Back in the 90s, as I mentioned, we published 2 books a year. Nowadays, honestly, it's more about 6 books a year. Partly this is because mass market publishing has kind of gone away. And just, changing markets, and we had a pandemic in there. So yeah, now it's about 6 books a year. So sometimes it's like, I always like to have an outline in the pipeline, so when a slot for a TOS novel opens up, hey, we've got a TOS outline from Greg sitting here gathering dust, let's use it, you know. And meantime, I'm off doing other projects. Because yeah, that's actually one of the interesting things is sometimes there can be a time delay. I turn in an outline, there's not an opening, I'm not the only Star Trek author, and there's a lot of us, and we're all competing for the same 6 slots. Suddenly, I get the, Greg, you remember that outline you submitted to us a year and a half ago? We want it, and we need it by November, you know. And I'm like, what was that book about again? And I have to kind of reread it, and sometimes find the enthusiasm, because in the meantime, okay, I'm off writing the Godzilla novelization, I'm doing other projects. So, okay, all right, this was the Chekhov book. I was excited about writing the Chekhov book a year and a half ago. But yeah, you find the excitement, you know. Time to go watch a bunch of Chekhov episodes and get the juices flowing again. And when it comes to generating ideas, no one has asked me that yet, but I'll jump in. Yeah, a lot of it is just sort of immersive, and write a Borg episode. So I'm gonna go back and just, thanks to the modern era we live in, I'm gonna go just binge a bunch of 7 of 9 episodes. I'm gonna go binge a bunch of, Q episodes, and that will hopefully, spring some, ideas going. My own personal agenda now, and my personal challenge is having written these books now for 30 years, and I've 20 plus books, is I'm always looking to challenge myself and find I don't want to repeat myself. So I was like, oh, what haven't I done? Like I mentioned, I've never written a book about Chekhov. So I'm going to write a book about Chekhov. How about I haven't done a Sulu-centric novel. Hey, how about a novel where Yura takes command of the ship? So I haven't done anything with Yura for like 5 years, so let's do something with Yura. And that's where I get the ideas. Or sometimes I'm just watching an episode and at this point I'm trained, I can't watch a Star Trek movie about kind of looking for springboards for ideas. I remember one specific instance, I don't always remember this specific moment when I got the idea for a book. One time I did, I was rewatching Conscience of the King for the 5 millionth time. That's the one with the Shakespearean actors, and the war criminal disguised as a Shakespearean actor and his crazy daughter. Spoiler for a 60-year-old episode. The North Korean is crazy. Don't trust her. Don't turn your back on her. But at the very last scene of that movie, of that episode, there's a scene where Kirk is talking after Lenore has had a nervous breakdown, in the Enterprise. McCoy is assuring Kirk that she'll get the best psychiatric care the Federation can handle, can provide her with. It will be okay. And I'm watching there, going, okay, so whatever happened to her, and was 23rd century psychiatry able to cure her of her disease? What happened to her afterwards? How did she feel about the fact that she was a serial killer? And what would happen if Kirk met her again after she had been, declared legally cured? Could he ever trust her again? And I'm thinking, I know what the plot of my next Star Trek book is. And that was Valdeans Will Rise. But that was the case where literally I'm just watching an old Star Trek novel, and don't worry, she'll get the best care. Well, whatever happened to Lenore Coridian. So I wrote that book, and that was where the ideas came from. So any questions? Yes?
I know that Peter David and John Clancy collaborated on a book like you. Have you ever done any collaboration with any of the actors who played characters on like a character development type of book?
Not on Star Trek, no. Once or twice in some other. No, I've never done a full collaboration with. And Walter Koenig, Chekhov actually has a story in this collection. They come from all our writers. William Shatner has written several Star Trek novels with Judith and Garfield, Reeve Stevens. A bucket list item I didn't even know I had was finding myself sharing a cover with Walter Koenig. Okay, so once or twice I have talked to an I'm going to digress. This is not actually a Star Trek story, but when I was writing the Underworld novels, remember the Underworld? It was the Vampires versus Lycans series. I wrote those novels for a while. And there was a character in the movies called Reyes. He was the second in command of the werewolves. He had no backstory. So I actually, for one of the novels, this guy needs a backstory, so I invented a whole backstory for him. And I turned the manuscript into Sony. And the nice lady at Sony calls me back and goes, so Greg, all that stuff you made about Reyes' past, you just made that up, right? That wasn't in the movies? No, I felt he needed a backstory. She goes, well, have you asked Kevin about that? That's Kevin Grevious, the actor who played Riggs. I said, I can do that? You know, what's his phone number? You know, this is not normal. You know, this has never happened. I've been doing this for 30 years. It has never happened before or since. Nobody says, oh, here's William Shatner's phone number, call and get his insights on Star Trek. That has never happened. But he said, I called, hi, Kevin, I don't think you remember me. We met briefly at the premiere party many years ago. I'm writing the novelization of Rise of the Lycans, and so Deborah at Sony said that you might have some thoughts about your character. And sure enough, being an actor, and being, by the way, the co-creator of the series, of course, he had his own extensive backstory he'd invent for his character, so I tossed mine out. I used his. And by the way, we are Facebook friends to this day. But yeah, that's the only case where I've ever had that, talk to the actors about their character, as opposed to just, maybe, years after the fact, hanging out at a convention while, paying for their autograph,
Yeah.
But yeah, that was that is not normal. I joke, I should have said, I'm having real trouble grasping Kate Beckinsale's character. Oh, and here's her phone number. Okay. But yeah, so I've met various authors, but only in the same way that all of us have, occasionally at a shore leave, wandering up and chatting to LeVar Burton at a panel. I did have a wonderful moment just in July. Most of you may know there's also a local Star Trek convention called Shore Leave. It is now based out of Lancaster. It is in July. And by amazing coincidence, this book came out in July this year. There was a Star Trek convention in Lancaster that year, and the Star Trek guest, the celebrity actor, was Robin Curtis, who plays Savik, who is a major character of this book. I'd like to say that I deliberately arranged to have Robin Curtis beam into Lancaster the very week my book debuted, but that was a total coincidence. But yeah, I actually made a point of at the convention tracking her down and saying, hi, I just wrote a book about you. I gave her a copy of the book, got her to sign mine, and she honestly, she's the greatest actress in the world, and she seemed genuinely pleased to find out that Savik was still alive and well and running around in the novels. And she was even, you used my Savik on the cover, as opposed to Kirstie Alley, I took credit, that was the art director's decision, but okay. But yeah, so I've occasionally met some of the actors at conventions, but no, not on a collaborative basis. And aside from that one time on Underworld, calling up Kevin Grevious and talking to him, that was so good. Okay. Oh wow. Okay, you first, and I'll go to you. Yes.
So, as somebody who does write myself, how do you navigate the enormous amount of Star Trek lore when you're writing this? There's been over 50 years worth of content in that series.
Well, partly when it comes to Star Trek, I know this in my bones. I cannot remember when I was not a Star Trek fan, and honestly, I would be showing up to watch, every new episode and every new movie, even if I wasn't a professional Trekkie. I was a Trekkie long before I went pro. So these characters, especially with TOS, since I grew up watching the original series and watching the syndicated reruns played constantly in the backdrop of my entire life, childhood, adolescence. So yeah, I know these characters very well. That being said, I have 3 shelves of reference books. The technical manuals, the Klingon encyclopedias, Klingon dictionaries, the Ferengi books of rules of acquisition, official TNG technical manuals. I have, and I refer to them constantly. And I also, when it's time to track on something, when I wrote the Lanark radio book, I went back and rewatched that episode many, many times. And when I'm working on a Star Trek book, when I was working on the Chekhov book, I went back and did a binge watch of all the Chekhov-centric episodes to try to get them. But it's harder when it's a new series or it's something that isn't, but with Star Trek, Star Trek, I know Star Trek in my bones. The newer series I may have, obviously writing Deep Space Nine before I've seen Deep Space Nine or writing Voyager before the show debuts, that's a little trickier. I am sort of dependent on my good friends. Although I do occasionally screw up. And this is why, like I said, there are many levels of oversight. I remember one time I was writing a novel about 7 of 9, and I had her take her tricorder off her shoulder. It was hanging on a strap on her shoulder I got a letter from Margaret, my editor. Greg, that's a TOS thing. Yeah. I mostly, the tricorders being big hunky items that you hold on a strap over your shoulder is a TOS thing. I just Margaret, I just wrote 6 TOS books in a row. You're right. The TNG era, it's a little tiny thing. I still don't know how it sticks to Seven of Nine's costume. I have never gotten a satisfactory answer to this. Yeah, where does she put things? She has no pockets. You know. But yeah, you have to be conscious of it. I do, and thank God these days we have things like Wikipedia and Memory Alpha. If I have to look something up. So yeah, when I wrote this story, what was the name of the planet where there were the killer spores from, this side of paradise? I went back and rewatched the episode. I can look it up in 5 minutes. And I have the Star Trek encyclopedia. Oh, I need a weird Star Trek item in a snack bar. Look it up. Oh, Spike and flame gems. That's for Trouble with Tribbles. Elysian aphrodisiacs, that's kind of a nudge weak to Alana Troyes. I have been accused, honestly, of having too many Easter eggs in my books. This is a judgment call. I resign to the fact that this is me. And that for every person who thinks, okay, enough with the wink, wink, nudge, nudge Star Trek Easter eggs, we get it, Greg, you watch the show, there are other people who love it. So I'm just that's me. I've been, I occasionally, is this one too many Easter eggs? Nah, okay. So, but yeah, I know stuff. And when I'm writing Star Trek, I am reading Star Trek novels. I'm listening to the soundtracks on, and these days, there is no shortage of reference materials. I have stacks of technical manuals and chronologies, and it's harder when you're doing one of the new series and you've got like a 20-page Bible, and that's all you've got to go on. I will tell a story about that, in fact. My Deep Space Nine novel, I wrote a Deep Space Nine novel, one of the very first ones, and the show had just debuted. And nowadays, people sometimes complain about that book. In that book, Kira is too mean to Bashir. You have to understand that at that point, all I had was the script for the first episode, where when they first meet, she tears him a new one. And that's, obviously years went by, even the characters, they became close friends. But I'm writing it, I have never seen the episode of Deep Space Nine, I am writing this book. Oh, Kira hates, Bashir. I took that and ran with it. I dialed that up to 11, because that was the only character trait I had there.
Honestly, he's kind of annoying in the first season.
Yeah, exactly. So we really leaned into it. Now, when people, the book is still out there, when somebody now in 2025 reads that book and says, Jesus, why is Kira being such a bitch to Bashir? I will also say Dax. Dax is his trouble. I will argue that Dax did not get a clearly defined personality until season 2. I struggled with Dax on that Deep Space Nine novel. I could not get a handle of her character. I remember, in fact, I barely used her and got a note back from my editor saying, you have to use Dax. Yeah, you have to, but I don't know who she is. You got to give her something to do. So, okay, so we built her up a little bit. But yeah, Dax, I did not, unlike McCoy, whose voice is burned into my brain, it's harder when it's characters. And you don't know which characters are going to be the breakout character. Honestly, I wrote my Voyager book, same situation. I had not seen the show when I plotted that book. If I had known how great the EMH was and that he was going to be the breakout character, I would have given the EMH a much bigger role. But all I had was like a paragraph of the character, but he was still called Doc Zimmerman in the 20-page outline I was given, So yeah, I remember I tried to beat him up a little bit more once I actually saw the show and I saw how great Robert Picardo was. But again, I hadn't seen the show, so my book was God help me, my book was very Kess-centric. I wrote back in the Kess entry. That's how old it was. Kess is on the cover of my Voyager book. This is one reason why I had to do a 7 of 9 book later on, because I felt cheated that I never got to do 7 of 9. So I actually snuck 7 of 9 into a TOS book. I wrote a novel where 7 of 9 falls from a time warp and finds herself back during the original 5-year mission. And she has to then team up with Kirk to get her back to her own timeline before history and the future are changed. I'm still amazed CBS let me do that. Okay, and actually, that's a case, honestly, that was not my idea. That was actually Margaret Clark, my editor. I had a big outline for a book about a time traveler from the future who people are trying to kidnap them because of their future knowledge and trying to get them back to their own time. And I was thinking of using some character from Star Trek, and Margaret said, well, why don't you use 7 of 9? Can I do that? Margaret said yes, And And we wrote the book, and so yeah, I finally got my chance to write 7 of 9, so it was great. I felt deprived because she was not around when I wrote my Voyager book. But yeah, like I said, that's the whole collaborative process. I had the whole idea for. In fact, I'll tell you a true story. The whole story of that book was that book was originally going to be a Kelvin book. That's the new series. This is Christopher Pine and Zachary Quinto. That was going to be a Kelvin novel, and originally the time traveler was going to be Prime Spock, the Leonard Nimoy Spock, who had fallen back in time, and I wrote a whole outline and everything for a book involving, Prime's, Leonard Nimoy Spock running around in the Chris Pine universe. For reasons that had nothing to do with the book, corporate reasons, that book got spiked. I got paid in full for the book. I wrote the entire book. I never got paid. I paid in full. It never got published. I then tried to find a way to salvage the book. Well, okay, if I can't do a Kelvin book, they basically decided at that point in time, this was many years ago, around the time the first movie opened, 2009, that we're going to hold off on doing any Kelvin novels. I said, well, I'm going to turn this into a TOS book and get paid twice. So I needed somebody from the time traveler from the future who doesn't belong here, and to replace Spock Prime, and it was Margaret who said, well, let's make it 7 of 9. And that's the book. So that was great. So, incidentally, on a sad note, I should mention, I keep mentioning Margaret. Margaret is much of my brain now. Margaret passed away a week last week.
Aww.
So she was my Star Trek editor for many, many years. I was actually supposed to deliver the Chekhov book to her on Monday, but she passed away on Saturday. So don't be way down, but I realize I keep mentioning Margaret, and it feels odd not to mention them. She was. There will be a fulsome tribute to her in the acknowledgements of my next book. I worked with Margaret for many, many years, not just on Star Trek. She was also my editor of my 4,400 books. I wrote books based on the 4,400 TV series. And yeah, Margaret and I had a good relationship, and very collaborative process. She suggested 7 of 9. There is a romantic subplot in the Chekhov book that is there. If you like it, when the book comes out, that was Margaret's idea. So her fingerprints are all over the new book. Sadly, it will be the last book we ever work on together, but And I actually don't know who my new Star Trek editor is going to be now. Things are still in flux. I just literally have it left. So sadly. But okay.
To whoever employed her will give you a new editor?
Yeah. I've been told no. They're going to find a new editor. Yeah. And Margaret was involved in the very beginning. All that stuff we talked about, the outlines, getting all the outlines approved and everything. That was Margaret. No, there's someone else, and there are people. There's a woman named Kimberly Wells. She's in charge of she's the main person who oversees the Star Trek book line at Pocket Books. But they're going to line up a new editor to finish editing this book. So that's sort of interesting. But oh, you had a question. Sorry, I got it.
Yeah. So you have written in all over the Star Trek universe. Do you have a favorite show or timeline that you'd like to explore?
I'd like to. Here's the thing. I have enjoyed every Star Trek series to various degrees. I have indeed dabbled in Voyager, DS9, TNG, but I'm 65 years old. I grew up watching TOS. That is my Trek, and so I tend to gravitate towards that. If Pocket Books calls me and tells me we need a Voyager book by July, if Pocket Books calls me tomorrow and says we need a Starfleet Academy book by July, I'm there. And also in recent years, I just kind of guess a niche. I am the TOS guy. I haven't written a full length. I've done some short stories for the magazine, for again Voyager and TNG and such. But that's my own device. I'm perfectly happy to just keep writing TOS novels for as long as they let me. So and that's and again those 79 episodes. Get back to your question. Are the ones that are burned into my brain. I know them backwards and forwards. I have watched all the other episodes in their time. I watched Lower Decks. I am counting the days until Strange New Worlds comes back. I'm intrigued by Starfleet Academy. I thought Lower Decks was delightful. But, I don't know them backwards and forwards. I would have to go look at my reference books and rewatch episodes. Whereas, like I said, I was 6 years old when TOS debuted. I literally cannot remember when I was not a Star Trek fan, or by which I mean TOS. So those are the characters that are just burned into my brain. Those 79 episodes are burned into my brain. So yeah, I'm the TOS guy.
I
Yeah.
I was just curious, since you've been working on the Star Trek series for like 30 years, how did you get started into getting employed to write for Star Trek?
Okay. The quick version is that I started out on the other side of the desk. I used to be a full-time editor working 9 to 5 for Tor Books. Tor Books is one of the leading publishers of science fiction. And I actually was a full-time editor there, and I actually edited the media tie-in novels in Tor. I edited the Farscape novels, I edited Freddy Krueger novels, I edited Mortal Kombat novels, I edited Zorro novels. So the sort of small, weird niche world of media tie-ins is sort of its own weird little community. We actually have an organization, the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, which means that we all know each other. So at that time, around the time DS9 came along, the editor of Star Trek was a guy named John Cordover. John and I came up through the woods together. John and I were assistant editors at Tor Books at one point. John moved on, became the new Star Trek editor. He knew me. We were Trekkies together. So when Deep Space Nine came along, they needed to expand. It was like, okay, they needed more authors, honestly. They had to expand the book Star Trek line. They already had the TOS book line, they had the TNG book line, and they wanted to hit the ground running with DS9 with lots of books already to go. So they needed to, that was when I foot into the door. I'd already done some tie-in writing. I'd written some Batman stuff for DC, so and I'll say one thing about me. I talked about this a bit on the movie novelization panel last night. I'll try not to repeat myself. When you're dealing with media tie-ins and everything, by which I mean not just Star Trek novels, but Star Wars novels, Buffy novels, Xena novels, Godzilla novels, Batman novels, there's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot of collaborative stuff, there's a lot of Hollywood egos sometimes. So speaking as someone who edits this stuff, you kind of have a tendency to fall back on the same people you know are reliable, people who are not going to be prima donnas, who are good team players. And I've actually said this, that when it comes to, as an editor, hiring somebody to write a Farscape novel, reliability and sanity are more important than talent. I mean, you want somebody who's a good writer, but you want somebody who is not, because you're going to have enough grief dealing with Hollywood people, honestly. So you want, and unfortunately, again, I'd already done some tie-in, I edited tie-in novels, I knew how the business worked. I did some Batman tie-in stuff for DC Comics. So, we need, and they knew I was a Trekkie. So, and like most careers, once one foot in the door gets you another foot. So, you did that Batman stuff. You want to send us an out? We desperately need Deep Space Nine authors. You want to send us an outline? I will do that. So, and here I am 3+ years later. And it's funny because, again, it's a small world. We all know each other. John Nordover and I, had been assistant editors together. So when he became the Star Trek editor, he knew I was a hardcore Trekkie. And, hey, Greg, you want to write a Deep Space Nine novel? Boom, that's how it worked. And actually, how I ended up writing the Underworld books was the same publisher, a lot of the same editor, John Nordover again. Hey, Greg, you like vampires and werewolves, don't you? Because you do me too well. I love vampires and werewolves. My very first book I ever published was a nonfiction guide to vampire literature. It was published by an academic press, believe it or not. So, hey, we just bought the license to this vampire series. Are you interested? Sure. And again, one job leads to another. I was telling a story earlier today. I wrote a couple of Buffy short stories. Again, published by Pocket Books. It's the same company, same people. I never actually managed to sell a Buffy novel. What happened is I submitted a Buffy outline to the Buffy editor, who I sold a couple of short stories to. And he came back to me and said, well, Greg, here's the thing. We have all the Buffy authors we need. We're booked up on Buffy authors. We don't need another Buffy author. However, we just acquired the license to Alias yesterday. How do you feel about Alias? I ended up writing 3 Alias novels. And that's how it works. It's just, does that answer your question? It's sort of, once I got my foot in the door because I was already an editor, I was already published, I'd already done 2 or 3 books, I'd written a young adult time travel novel about pirates that nobody read. So I'd written a nonfiction book on the history of vampire literature. I was full-time editor, I edited Freddy Krueger novels. I edited Mortal Kombat novels. God help me, I edited the novelization of Cutthroat Island, the biggest flop in Hollywood history. I'm perversely proud of the fact that of all the new editors in New York City, I alone had the vision to buy up all the book rights to the biggest flop in Hollywood history. I'm proud of that. I would point out that the movie lost $100 million and put the studio in the bankruptcy. I paid $15,000 for book rights, so we did not go bankrupt, okay?
Yeah.
And it did not cost us $100 million to put out that paperback, I trust you, okay? Maybe we even made a slight profit. And we sold the translation rights to the Germans and the Japanese. Okay, but yeah, so yes, there you go.
Is there like a...
Oh, I'm sorry, the one behind you has been trying to get my attention.
Have you ever read about Kirk's backstory?
What's that?
Have you ever read about Kirk's backstory at all? Or are you like thinking about
Well, some of that, we've been fleshing that out. There are bits and pieces we know. We know about the whole incident on, I'm blanking the name of the planet, because I don't have my encyclopedia here, with, what's his name, Kodos the Executioner. We know that he was a, young lieutenant on like on various ships. It was leaving out, and he's forever running into old flames. Boy, you can't keep track of the old flames. And on over the last several years, I don't think there's ever been an official backstory. I was never given a Bible about it. We have, I think at some point there's probably 2 or 3 different versions of Kirk's experiences, during the whole genocide, war crimes of Kodos the Executioner. I'm sure someone has written a book about, his, affair with Carol Marcus or Janice Lester or any of the many old flames he runs into. So yeah, basically, the basic rule is, canon flows downhill from the actual film. And this is not a judgment call. The tail does not wag the dog. This is worth stressing that we cannot contradict established canon. If the episode says that Kirk, was a young lieutenant on the Farragut at this point in time, we're stuck with that. The movies and TV shows do not have to treat the books as canon. Because in fact, not because of, this is not any sort of judgment call or value judgment on the artistic worth, it's simply because, again, the tail does not wag the dog. And simply because, honestly, it's just practicality. About 2% of the TV viewing audience, about 2% of the movie viewing audience reads the books. So it would be insane for the TV series to reference stuff that only 1% of the audience has read, a conversation that will never happen. Oh, here's a script for our new $200 million Star Trek movie. Oh, we got a problem here. It contradicts a $6.99 paperback novel by Greg Cox that was published in 1997. Okay, back to the drawing board. That will never happen. I am humble enough to admit this. So canon flows downhill. So we can try to squeeze in stuff between the lines and try to flesh stuff out, like I said, about Kirk's younger years. And every time they give us something, yay, that's something we can use on. And now, thanks to some of the newer shows like Strange New Worlds, we're actually getting more toys to play with. And this even kind of spills a little bit into the TOS novels. Now, there are some people who actually, would prefer that the modern stuff not flow into the TOS stuff. I see this as giving me more toys to play with. I did once get a very angry 1-star review because I dared to reference something from Disco in a TOS novel, and damn you, Greg Cox. But new alien races I can play with. Oh, new stuff. In fact, I snuck in a cute joke in one of my books. In one of my TOS novels, marketed as TOS, Spock alludes to the fact that he once in his younger days experimented with having a beard. This was not universally well received. I wasn't sure if Pocket Books was going to let that joke get through, but it got through, okay? But yeah, we actually now, and I'm not going gung-ho on it, I'm not going to like, oh my god, start throwing Michael Burnham into every other TOS book. But, we have stuff we can play with, like a Spock we can play with Cybok. And so, it's always about, like I said, I've mentioned looking for stuff that is hinted at or alluded to. I've joked about I've got an entire trilogies out of 3 lines of dialogue from a Star Trek episode, I wrote an entire trilogy about Khan's backstory of the Eugenics Wars, which is like, basically a couple lines of dialogue from Space Seed I got a trilogy out of it, you know. And you build these, okay, what did Khan say about what happened in the 1990s? I wrote an entire book about that, you know. And yeah, anytime they sort of refer to some incident in their past about, oh, I briefly visited this planet. Trust me, there's a graphic novel, there's a comic book, or there's a novel that has fleshed that story out, unless it's Cat's Paws, Fox Brain. Okay. So, but like I said, at this point, it is getting harder to find, you know. And the more they tell us about stuff, it gives us more toys to play with. And sometimes we try to reference each other's books a little bit, but not always. I think the Romulan Commander, these days, I think there's more of it. Star Trek novels have been around for a long time by 3 or 4 different publishers. So you are going to find, they aren't going to be universally consistent. I think that the unnamed Romulan Commander from the Enterprise incident has about 6 different names. If you look at the Bantam novels, the DC comics, the Golden Age comics, the current Pocket Books novel, you know. I try occasionally to be consistent with stuff. When I wrote my novel, a novel about Number 1 from the Cage, this is back before SNW, Strange New World. I went back and read all of the previous Pike era novels and what they had said about that character. Just to try to like, and sort of cherry pick them and try to not to be contradictively, you know, shamelessly. Because I'll go back and do my homework, and this gives you ideas. Because, you know, even though the books aren't canon, you know, if I'm going to write a novel about Number 1, let's go back and see what D.C. Fontana wrote about Number 1, what Peter David wrote about Number 1. When I mentioned Diane Carey wrote the definitive novels about Captain Robert April. When I went back in April, I went back and rewrote her books, and I wrote Captain April as written by Diane Carey, you know, just to, you know, as a tip of the hat to my predecessors and current colleagues. So you get loose continuity. We try to make it work what we work. But sometimes, and invariably, the books have to be, I should mention, the books have to be canon with the TV shows at the point the books are published. Invariably, it is an occupational hazard. A movie will come along, a new movie, a new episode that will render one of your books apocryphal. Oh, well, how about that? They, you know, this happens regard if you're doing a thing that's ongoing, you know, oh, they did an episode that completely wipes out my previous novel. Okay, that it was canon, it was consistent with canon in 1997. It is no longer consistent with canon, you know, because the shows will go their own way and they are not going to, you know, sorry, we can't do that. Rick Cox wrote a novel, 1997. It's locked in stone. So, does that answer your question? Thank you. No, other questions here. Oh yes.
Do they keep any kind of like, does the like CBS or some issues to keep any kind of a log of some of those parameters that are given in the various books to help with?
I think that, I don't know if there's unofficially, I don't know if there's a master database, but that is why there is oversight. There's always someone at Pocket Books whose job it is to, and they keep an eye out on this and say, oh, hang on, Greg, and there's a sliding scale. If your book contradicts something that was in a Bantam novel from 1972, that's probably not, you know, if, oh, well, sorry, Dayton Ward, Una McCormick wrote a book 6 months ago that said something opposite, you don't want to contradict a book that was published 3 months ago. But I think, I'm not sure how much of it is just, you know, officially is hey, the Star Trek editors, like Margaret was there forever. And she knew what the other, and they're the ones who are kind of responsible for keeping track of what the other authors are all doing, that we're all more or less on the same page. And then Paula Block, she is now retired, but Paula Block was at CBS. And Paula Block, oh my God, she is the gold standard for licensors. You know, she was the one who kind of watched over the entire Star Trek book franchise, working for CBS back in the day. And oh well, no, you know, sorry, Peter David did this. Vonda McIntyre did this, and again, a lot of these people are my friends and colleagues. I want to respect them. This book is a sequel to the whale movie. We all remember the movie with the whales. Yeah. This is a book. This book is largely a sequel to. It's about what happened to not Gillian Anderson, but what's her name? Gillian Taylor. Thank you. Yes, this is about what happened to Gillian Taylor. Now, in fact, when I wrote this book, I went back and read the novelization of Star Trek IV by Vonda McIntyre. Partly out of respect for Vonda, partly because Vonda was actually one of my old creative writing teachers. I think of myself as a second generation Star Trek writer because honestly, Vonda McIntyre, Norman Spinrad were among my old writing teachers. And Also, and honestly, there are scenes. There is a character. Is that right? Sorry, not me. Thank God. There are characters in this book I lifted from Vonda's novelization of The Voyage Home she wrote back in 1986. I am not obliged to do this. I'm not sure anyone at Paramount or CBS is expecting me to do this, but again, you know, the novelization is there. Let me at least, you know. Also, why reinvent the wheel? It's like a con. One of my colleagues invented a flag for con in one of his, you know, novels. Oh well, why should I reinvent the wheel? I will use the con flag described in a previous graphic novel. Gary Seven's Mysterious Alien Supervisors. Howard Weinstein gave them a name in an old DC comic. When I came time to write my Gary Seven novel, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. Howie already gave these aliens a name. I'm going to use the same name.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, this is just, you know, not mandatory. There's not a database. There's nobody in charge of this. But, you know, we're all Star Trek fans and we all talk to each other. In fact, I remember once, this is a true story, Nathan Ward, who is another Star Trek author, I wrote 3 books involving Gary Seven. We all remember Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln and Isis the Cat. I wrote 3 novels about them. When Nathan calls me up and he says, you know, hey Greg, I have an idea, I want to do a Gary Seven novel. Am I stepping on your toes? And I need to explain here that you did not have to do this. I don't own Gary Seven. I didn't invent Gary Seven. I don't have a monopoly on Gary Seven. But you know, I have been the Gary Seven guy. I've written. You want? What's that? Oh, we're out of time. Oh, sorry. So, okay, quick answer. Yeah. So, but again, he called me out of professional courtesy to make sure he wasn't stepping on my future plans. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.